Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Public Forum. In the show today, I'll look at India's diplomacy with China and the US. China and India held their upgraded strategic dialogue last week to shore up bilateral ties. Since 2015, China-India strategic and cooperative partnership for peace and prosperity has grown. The two countries have set the goal of forging a closer development partnership, made new progress in exchanges and cooperation in various areas, and stayed in close communication on regional and international issues. But the politics globally is evolving, and the closeness or differences between these two Asian giants will influence international economy and the world order. So where do China-India relations stand today? What lies ahead in future, especially in an extremely volatile global situation? We discuss it in Public Forum today. So some issues and some questions we delve into are that how significant was Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar's visit to China? What does a strategic relationship between the two countries look like? What are its driving factors and core objectives? How can India rebalance the Pakistan-China axis? And more importantly, what are the challenges for the emerging US-China-India triangle, especially under the Trump leadership? And to talk more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, who's Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, joined me on the panel. Welcome to the program. How does this strategic dialogue, what kind of dimension does it really give to these bilateral meets, Dr. Chaulia? And how significant was it, since it seems to be a broader way of, doing this dialogue, as has been, or, different from what has been the practice in the past?
Yes, Shalini, indeed, it's a very institutionalized kind of bilateral relationship, as it should be, because we share over 4,000 kilometers of a disputed boundary, and we are neighbors, and we are aspirants to superpower status, both of us. So I think China and India, there is indeed a variety of mechanisms, as you mentioned, and I think the idea was, there was a strategic economic dialogue, there was a strategic defense dialogue, and now there is just a holistic strategic dialogue. And then there is a separate channel between the National Security Advisor and Yang Jiechi on that side for the border dispute settlement. So if you look at all these elements, there is clearly, I think the basis of all this is a concern that we should avoid war, number one. We should minimize hostilities, number two, and number three, we should coexist even if we don't agree and converge on everything. So I think that is the reason why they have such frequent interactions. To some extent, even military to military exchanges have also started happening between India and China, which were not at all there earlier. So they have been doing some joint exercises on countering terrorism and so on. So I think, I don't know whether they really build confidence, but meeting face to face on a regular basis, and then building the base for high level visits and exchanges. Right. All these is meant to be, there's a lot of diplomatic activity between China and India. I mean, the skeptics can say that the end result of it is we don't get much out of it, but that's true. But nonetheless, by engaging continuously, we are showing our intent, both sides, I think, that we want to minimize the negatives and try and maximize whatever positives we can take.
I would also like to understand now, well, Dr. Chaulia, the fact that the strategic relationship between these two countries, how should that be defined and how should that be viewed? And is it also changing, evolving with time because of the changes around the world as well as the geopolitical changes?
Yeah, no, I mean, frankly, we have been using this term a little loosely, and we have over 24 so-called strategic partnerships now. So China was signed in 2005. It suggests a greater degree of coordination, especially in military sphere and in the geopolitics. But unfortunately, with China, we have not been able to reach that, because there is a degree of competition and suspicion. So I think we should set aside the term. I mean, although it's used, it has no real depth. Rather, I would focus on the the basic goal of conflict avoidance and management of the relationship. It's a kind of like a sophisticated way to say we agree to disagree. on key issues.
But how can you manage the relationship when the two countries on some issues they don't really meet eye to eye, and you see that that's where the problem begins?
There's conflict come cooperation, right? So that's the dynamic, this complex relationship. So we do manage. For example, unlike the Pakistani side of the border, we don't have bloodshed on the line of actual control with China. So while there's a kind of push and shove with regards to the disputed points where the Chinese the incursions happen, and apparently we also do it. But at the end of the day, we avoid conflicts because we have this peace and tranquility formula, and the hotlines and all these things. So that's how we manage it. It's been a long time since an Indian soldier or a Chinese soldier actually shot at each other or killed each other.
Okay, let's understand China's stand on Masood Azhar's case, and the fact that China's defense ties with Pakistan had been growing. There had been in fact reports suggesting that China would also like to give some submarines and other supports to Pakistan. How do you look at that? Does it really pose a big challenge to India? Should India be thinking of rebalancing this Pakistan-China axis now?
It is a millstone around our neck. I mean, going back in time. And even during the Cold War and even post-Cold War period, they have been the so-called all-weather allies. And in fact, this sensational expose of a internal meeting in Pakistan where the foreign secretary was briefing the military, he let out, which came out in Dawn, the newspaper, he let out that the Chinese are saying that they are willing to continue to keep the technical hold on this Masood Azhar, but even then their patience is running. So what they're essentially, it's a very coordinated move. Then the technical arguments are actually baloney, because the real reason is they believe that this is how they can maintain pressure on us, you see. And if India is bleeding from terrorism, if Kashmir is not settled, if all these peripheries of India challenge the central government's written authority, the state remains weak, and we cannot rise up to become China's equal. And that is where the Global Times comes in, because this is a hardline wing of the Communist Party which is saying India should forget aspiring to be our equal and drop this whole dance of parity. Rather, they should know where their place is. They are inferior to us and they should behave. So what they're trying to say is their whole objective is with us is to block our rise. That's how they do it. So
is trade also an important factor here between India and China, since we know that Chinese economy particularly has gone through a lot last year, and there are concerns of India's manufacturing sector growing, maybe in a way diminishing the role that Chinese exports really play in our market. So is that also a major concern?
See, the balance of trade is still very much in their favor, and we've been raising the alarm bells for years now. And there is an agreement that frankly we don't probably have enough manufactured goods to be able to compete in the Chinese market right now. But they will try and ease our access to IT, to pharmaceuticals, and possibly textiles. These are areas where we do have some relative strengths. But nonetheless, I think the Chinese have a pretty, it's a very politicized approach to even economic relations. So their logic is that, we will invest $46 billion in a failing country like Pakistan, but not even 1/10 of it in India. So the Chinese investment in India rising, but not very much.
The interesting part is that this US, China, India triangle, it has been in news. It's going to be in news, of course, in some, for some more time. It's certainly evolving. But what kind of challenges does it really pose to India?
I think Trump is definitely intending to be more aggressive towards China overall, even though he backed down on the one China policy issue. And I think Trump seems to be also placing greater emphasis on military spending and increasing US military capabilities and so on. I think overall the Chinese will face greater heat in the coming 4 years, be it in South China Sea, be it worldwide. In global competition. Trump has been saying that we've stopped winning wars and it's time for us to win wars. And one of the indications of this is it looks like on North Korea, which is a Chinese ally and stooge. Trump intends to possibly open dialogue, or although it's been shelved temporarily, and there's a lot of pressure on China to deliver, because China is seen as talking the talk but not walking it on UN sanctions on North Korea and so on. So if you look at the overall regional perspective in Asia Pacific and beyond, I think the Chinese will find a more hostile global environment. Not so much about democracy and human rights, because that used to be the earlier US line about China.
Right.
This is more based on
economy based.
Yeah, and also it's based on trade and the belief that the Americans believe the Chinese are cheating them. And two, it's also based on a more militaristic notion about restoring America's military power and potentially using the military more than Obama did. So all these mean that there are threats to China, and therefore I think it's reason for us to believe that they will be more accommodating towards India, because indeed it is one flank less for them. If they are fighting some kind of a global tussle for supremacy with the United States, they would want us, if not on their side, they obviously will not be on their side, at least not clearly joining the American camp. So that's a kind of we have to maneuver this to our advantage, where the Chinese know that they cannot really go against our core national interests far too long, or else we have the US card that we have to keep playing.
Concluding remarks from you, is it really going to be very, very challenging diplomatically managing these things in the current situation when there's a lot of volatility in the global scenario too?
See, if they help us get into NSG, and if they really genuinely support us for permanent membership of Security Council, I think they will really be able to manage the pressure coming from the US.
Fine.
But if not, then this turmoil will keep on happening.
Fine. On that note, we'll conclude this discussion. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, that's all for today in Public Forum. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.